The film begins with a spaceship named Liberty landing on the moon. After landing, the ship unveils the upcoming election banner at the request of the president. An astronaut named Sanders looks for a reported helium-3 crater and finds vast quantities of helium-3 beneath him. He heads for a stronger signal when he discovers that there is a gigantic secret helium-3 mine right in front of their ship. But before Sanders can report back to his partner, Washington, about the mining base, a Nazi soldier suddenly appears behind him and kills him. Washington sees that and tries to escape, but the Nazi soldiers blow up the entire spaceship behind him. So he gets blown back by the explosion and gets captured by the Nazi army. In a secret swastika-shaped military institute on the dark side of the moon, a Nazi teacher named Renata tells a bunch of schoolchildren that they need to learn a language called English in order to help their people when they return to Earth. The teacher, Renata, starts a history lesson and explains that the Nazis escaped the Earth after being defeated by the Americans and took shelter on the dark side of the moon after World War II. The Nazi soldier named Adler brings Washington to their commander at their base and presents Washington. Adler believes that Washington is a spy from Earth, so he opens his face mask to see that Washington is a black man. Which is surprising to the Nazis, of course, because they still think the black race are still getting discriminated by the Americans. Back on Earth, the president blames her campaign manager, Vivian, for approving the idea to do an re-election advertisement on the moon. She orders Vivian to do anything to cover up the entire situation and reveals that she only sent Washington to the moon so that she could gain some more votes from the black community in the upcoming election. Back on the moon, Adler comes to the teacher, Renata, and asks her to interrogate Washington. Washington tries to ease the situation, lowers everyone's guards and attacks the soldiers. He then takes this opportunity to jump off the edge. But since he doesn't have a clue of the way out of the base, he just lets the wind guide him and falls on an unknown ventilator. Trying to find his way out, Washington accidentally falls on Adler, who is in the middle of talking with Renata. Washington doesn't waste a single moment and pushes a lever behind him, thinking it's his way out. However, that lever opens the airlock in the chamber, and both Washington and Renata get pulled by the air pressure. Washington somehow manages to pull himself back inside the chamber alongside Renata and closes the airlock immediately. Adler and his soldiers show up at that moment and point their guns at Washington. Washington tells him not to shoot and mentions that he knows the US president. So Adler stops and commands his soldiers to take him to Dr. Richter's laboratory. Richter and Adler interrogate Washington and ask him why he came to the moon. But they can't seem to comprehend that Washington is here only to promote the president's re-election campaign. Adler finds a cell phone in Washington and asks him what it is. But Richter can't believe that a device this small can be compared to a computer. It seems the Nazis are still living on the same technology from the 1940s. So they have no clue about modern technology. Richter's racist beliefs tell him to open Washington's skull to gather information. But Adler doesn't want to go through such desperate measures so early and tells Richter to get verbal information in the next 24 hours. At the UN headquarters, the leaders discuss the missing astronauts. But they soon get into their own argument about pursuing a higher power. The president's campaign manager, Vivian, becomes frustrated thinking about what she should do. Their campaign is failing, so she vents her anger on her employees and blames them for giving her terrible ideas. But the blame game needs to end, as she needs to find a way out before the next morning. Back at the moon's secret Nazi base, Adler enters Renata's room and tells her straightforwardly that she wants to marry her. He tells her that even science demands their union as their genetic match is 97%. So, it's their destiny to reproduce perfect offspring for the people. He tells her about his dream to conquer the entire Earth and reveals that after the current commander passes away, he will be in charge and rule everything with her. In another base, Richter talks about a miracle weapon that has been under development for the last 40 years. The secret weapon called the battleship Götterdämmerung was only a dream of the Führer. Until now. Richter reveals that using the cell phone of Washington, which has over 1,000 times more computing power than all their biggest computers combined, he has engineered a cable to connect the cell phone to their computer. Richter proceeds to turn on the machine, but it turns off again as the cell phone's battery is low. Adler realizes the potential of the battleship and requests that they send him back to Earth to gather more cell phones like this one. However, according to the leader, any soldiers who have left the moon haven't returned. But Adler promises that he will return and convinces the driver. Meanwhile, Washington is constantly tortured by German noises. So Renata saves him from his misery and comes to him to have a conversation. She has an interest in Washington because she has never seen a black man before. She reveals that the mad scientist Richter is her father and that Adler is going to be the next leader. But Washington doesn't care about any of that and just wants to get out of there. She hears Richter coming back, so she tells Washington to pretend to be a Nazi if he wants to live before leaving. Richter comes back and proceeds to conduct more gruesome experiments on Washington. Adler gets ready to leave the moon for Earth, but Renata wants to go with him too, as she believes she knows everything about it. Still, Adler doesn't take her with him because he believes this to be a do-or-die mission, and he kisses her passionately before entering the spaceship. Before the spaceship departs, Richter comes there with Washington after successfully Aryanizing him. The term itself is twisted enough, but that wasn't enough. Because mad scientist Richter has turned Washington into a potential white man, not only that, Washington has also become a Nazi, but we all know that it is just an act to stay alive. Adler and the commander blindly believe that Washington has actually been brainwashed into becoming a Nazi. So, Adler welcomes him on the team and tells him about the mission to retrieve more cell phones from Earth. They soon leave for Earth, and the UFO-looking spaceship lands on an open area in New York. Just after they land on Earth, Adler demands that Washington take him to the president. Renata reveals that she also snuck her way in here and kissed Adler. The owner of the area shoots one of the Nazi soldiers and makes them get out of there. The next morning, Adler sees a Volkswagen bus parked beside a gang, so he tries stealing it. But Washington knows better, so he takes the initiative to negotiate with his friends. But, since he has no clue that he is white now, the gang gets offended seeing a white guy pretending to be black and begins shooting at him. Adler steals the vehicle anyway, so Washington jumps inside and flees the place unscathed. He realizes that he is now a white man, so he becomes furious. But Adler silences him by showing his gun. Adler again reminds him of the plan to meet with the president. So, Washington kidnaps the president's campaign manager, Vivian. But, during that process, he gets kicked out of the vehicle. Adler takes Vivian to an abandoned warehouse and asks her the whereabouts of the president. Adler reveals that he plans to destroy Earth, but Renata reminds him that his mission is to just retrieve some cell phones. Adler decides to torture Vivian, but Renata thinks otherwise and shares her idea of spreading peace. Vivian realizes that these two are a bunch of clowns and comes up with an idea to save the president's re-election campaign. She takes the two to the president, who is in the middle of doing her workout. She shows Madam President the miracle she needs to win the next election. The two Nazi clowns, well, mostly Renata plays inspirational music and starts a monologue about her aim to bring peace and prosperity to the world. The president uses her monologue in her election campaign speech and wins the people's hearts. 3 months later, Washington has turned into a madman who is constantly on the streets trying to warn the people about the moon people. Renata sees Washington and tries to talk with him. But Washington becomes aggressive, so the conversation turns into a fight, and they both get arrested by the police. The police officer, upon hearing the story, thinks both of them are nutjobs, so he releases them from the police station. Renata proposes to Washington that they go watch a movie together. But after watching Charlie Chaplin's The Great Divorce, Renata realizes the Nazis are actually the bad people. Renata somehow finds herself in trouble with the local goons, so Washington has no choice but to save her. Meanwhile, Vivian and Adler are on a date. Vivian thinks that Adler is playing a Nazi character, which turns her on. So, she starts making out with Adler, and they find themselves on the floor when Adler notices that the Führer is right in front of him. The Führer thinks that Adler has committed treason by teaming up with the president, so he decides to penalize him. The Nazi reveals his plans to wipe all humans off the face of the earth. Renata and Washington also come there, so it's the perfect opportunity for the Führer to kill everyone. However, Vivian is not dead and uses a machine gun to kill the Führer and his soldiers. Adler and Vivian again make out before Adler leaves to conquer Earth. Adler goes to the roof of the building and announces to the soldiers that he is the leader from now on. However, the leader is not dead yet and comes to shoot Adler, who dies from bleeding out right in front of him. Adler leaves Earth with the spaceship and orders the Nazi battleship to shower meteors on Earth right away. Everyone gets panicked seeing thousands of UFOs invading America, except the president. She tells Vivian that this is brilliant, and since she is now a wartime president, she will surely get re-elected. She sends her own air force to retaliate and easily takes down the Nazi fighter planes with their modified weapons. Renata decides to go back to the moon to stop the battleship from starting, and she even convinces Washington to join her. They reach the spaceship and head straight to the moon. The United Nations assembles to discuss the attacks. Each country's leader points at the other for being the reason behind the attack and again starts joking around like fools. The American president discloses that the Nazis are actually responsible for this attack and reveals that she will be using America's own Mars exploration spaceship to take down the Nazis. The astronauts on the Mars exploration spaceship, along with their commander Vivian, receive orders from the president to take down the Nazis and prepare to attack back. However, even using nuclear weapons against the Nazis, the spacecraft gets hit and loses control. The other countries' leaders reveal that they also have armed spaceships, and they decide to help America take down the Nazis. Adler orders his men to fight until their last breath and heads back to the moon. He shows the people Vivian's iPad and announces to them that the battleship Götterdämmerung will fly again. Meanwhile, the leaders of the United States keep destroying the Nazi ships one after another. Vivian also heads to the dark side of the moon to take revenge on Adler. Renata and Washington sneak their way into the secret Nazi base and discuss their plan to paralyze the engines of the battleship. Vivian gets the visuals of the Nazi fortress, so she orders them to fire nukes at them, knowing that there are innocent women and children there. It's a total massacre. Adler starts the helium-3 engines and reveals their secret weapon. Adler then orders the cannons to fire, but upon realizing that the Earth is on the other side of the moon, Adler bombs down parts of the moon to make way for the missiles to reach Earth. Meanwhile, Washington tries disconnecting Vivian's iPad from the battleship, but Richter stops him. Renata plays the Nazi anthem, making all of the Nazi officers salute. Her little gamble gives her the chance to proceed further, and even Washington manages to take down Richter. Renata finds Adler, but he easily disarms her. But Renata acts cunningly and makes Adler electrocute himself. Adler tries to attack her, but she uses her heels to kill him. Washington disconnects the iPad from the battleship, so it begins to fall on the moon. The world leaders congratulate each other, and the president personally thanks Vivian for her contribution. Vivian accidentally reveals that there is a helium-3 mine on the moon, so the world leaders rebel against hiding it from the Americans. Soon, the fleets that were banded together to fight the Nazis turned against each other. Renata takes a class with the survivors on the moon and teaches them to never show aggression. Washington returns to his true colors using Richter's pills and reunites with Renata. They make out in front of Nazis and decide to teach the upcoming generation to be properly civilized while the world leaders are turning on themselves for a meager power advantage.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more movie recaps.